My name's Alex Bellos. I'm the author of The Language Lovers Puzzle Book, and thanks to the Royal Institution for inviting me to give this talk, and thanks for everyone from all over the world, Toronto, Christchurch, as well as the UK, for tuning in. So the name of the talk, the title of the talk that I gave the Royal Institution a few weeks ago was The Puzzle of Language. And I'm going to retrospectively change the title just by adding a single letter and call it The Puzzles of Language, because in the next hour or so, I'm going to be just giving you loads of puzzles. We're going to be solving puzzles together. We've got puzzles about words, puzzles about languages, puzzles about signs, puzzles about alphabets, puzzle about pizza. I love puzzles, as you can tell. What I love about puzzles is that firstly, they're entertaining. They're something that you want to do and you get enjoyment just from doing of them, but also they introduce you to a new idea, or you learn something from them, but you learn something from them in a way that you are working it out for yourself. So I think puzzles are brilliant, and usually I've written about maths puzzles, but they're particularly good, I've found, to understand about language and languages. So without further ado, let's get to the first puzzle. It's a quick puzzle. There are going to be some quick multi-choice puzzles all the way through, and this is why you've got a poll. So if you click on the poll thing, you can actually vote A, B, C, or D. There's a bit of a 10-second delay, so I'm only going to get a reaction in 10 seconds, so which is why I'm telling you that before I read out the puzzle. Which animal makes this sound? So in German, and this is the pronunciation according to a German person I spoke to recently, is guru, guru. In Hungarian, it's buruk, and I know that pronunciation is correct because a Hungarian speaker I asked this morning, my mother, hi mum, you're in the audience, told me so. In Russian, I spoke to a Russian speaker, it's guli guli. My Russian isn't as good as my Hungarian or my German. And in Turkish, it's guguguguk. Okay, what is it? Is it a frog, B, could be frog or toad, B, a pigeon, C, a turkey, or D, a duck? Well, folks, looking at the polls so far, you are wrong. It's not a turkey. That's probably what I would have said. It is actually a pigeon. Which is interesting because in English, we don't really have a word for pigeons. If someone said, what does a pigeon say? I wouldn't actually know the answer, which is quite interesting. And pigeons are, it's part of British life. I am much better known for my math puzzles and for writing about math than I am for writing about language. So you might be thinking, why are you writing a book now about language puzzles? Well, in my defense, I could say that I am fluent in at least one language, but really the puzzles that are in my book in the main and that we'll be talking about today are not written by me. I have taken them and adapted them from linguistics Olympiads. Now, linguistics Olympiads have a 50-year history. They started about 50 years ago in Russia, and they are competitions for pre-university kids, so secondary and sixth form. Just they're problems and puzzles designed to get people, or the young people, excited by studying language and learning modern languages. And when I heard a couple of years ago about this organization, about the Linguistics Olympiads, I have to say I hadn't heard about them before. I looked at their archive, and there's about almost 50 years archive, thousands of puzzles written by native speakers in lots of different languages, by professional linguists. I was just blown away. The puzzles were fantastic. They attracted my kind of mathematical mind, but also they twisted my mind in ways that hadn't been twisted before. And more than that, I was learning so much. I really saw how puzzles, this language puzzles, could be a kind of gateway to a sort of celebration of just cultural, linguistic diversity and learning about human culture and history and, of course, science. So I'm going to start with a very simple linguistics Olympiad style problem. And it's about Japanese. So here we go. Here are 8 phrases in Japanese. Boro niko, 2 balls. Tsuna nihon, 2 ropes. Uma nito, 2 horses. Kamai nimai, I apologize for my Japanese pronunciation. I haven't spoken to any Japanese people to check. Ashi gohon, which is, I think my face is in the wrong way. I can't remember. There's 5 legs. Thank you. Ringo goko is 5 apples. Sara gomai, 5 plates. Kaba goto is 5 hippos. So I've given you 8 phrases in Japanese. The puzzle is, what is the Japanese for 9 cucumbers? Is it kyuri kyuhon, kyuri kyuko, kyuri kyuhiki, or kyuri kyuto? Now, the first thing when you see this is you might just burst out laughing and think, how on earth am I supposed to know? Then you might look at it. And one of the first skills that you need in solving these problems, which is a particularly good, if not the fundamental skill in life, maybe it's what makes us human, is pattern recognition. And you look at the patterns here and you think, do you know what? I have no idea, because all the English phrases have a number as a word, which is repeated. So we have 2 4 times and 5 4 times. But in the Japanese phrases, there's no single word that's repeated. So you're thinking, oh my God, where do I start? Then with a little bit more, you will notice that actually on the left column, all the Japanese phrases that describe 2 of something include ni. And all the Japanese phrases that are 5 of something include go. So it's probably, it's fair to assume, I think you can say, be pretty confident that ni means 2 and go means 5. The problem is, and then you would also see that there are other patterns there, because they're the suffixes on that number word, the second word in the Japanese, are repeated in both columns. There is a ko, which is in blue there, niko and goko. There's a hon, there's a to, and there's a mai. And also, if you see in the solution has hon, ko, hiki, and to. So essentially, this is the kind of business end of the solution. What we're actually being asked to do is to work out why these number words, or the number unit, the ni and the go, has these suffixes, and how we deduce what the suffix will be for 9 cucumbers. We can assume that the first words are the nouns, so boru is balls, tsuna is ropes, etc., and that the second word, so therefore kyuri in this solution is cucumbers. But what is hon, ko, hiki, and to? Now, if you had a pencil and paper, you might be able to write it down, but I'm going to do that for you. You see that the ko words are balls and apples, the hon words are ropes and legs, the to, horses and hippos, the mai, sheets of paper and plates. And this is the bit that twisted my mind as a maths person, never really having to think about meaning like this. You realize that balls and apples are round things, ropes and legs are long, thin things, horses and hippos are big animals, sheets of paper and plates are flat things. In other words, when you count in Japanese, you can't just say the number, you need to describe the type of thing it is. And what type of thing is a cucumber? It is a long, thin thing. Therefore, kyurikuhon is the correct answer. And it's interesting. The poll was number 4 started out in the lead, and then number 2 is people thought it was number 2. I think that's interesting, and I imagine that's probably because people thought it was to do with fruit, vegetables. So you've got a cucumber and an apple, but that's not true. So where do we go from here? What have we learned here? We've learned that Japanese has this incredibly complicated way of doing the most simple thing, counting. In fact, I've just given you 4 of these kind of qualifiers, these number suffixes. There are hundreds, not just for round things, thin things, animals, flat things, also for floors, for books, cars, sword strokes. You're good for, samurai. You need to learn hundreds of these to be able to just count properly in Japanese. So one's first reaction is, wow, that's fascinating, and how complicated, how did they do it? And then you realize, well, English is actually a little bit like this. There are things in English that you also can't count without qualifying. Cattle, you don't say 5 cattle, you say 5 heads of cattle. Bread, you don't say 5 bread, you say loaves of bread. So actually Britain has something similar. That's why I love these problems. You learn something about another culture, then you forces you to think about your own culture and realize to kind of celebrate the diversity, that all cultures, all languages are just as complicated and confusing and have their own idiosyncrasies. I want to know the correct meaning of this Japanese phrase, yokomeshi, which its literal meaning is a meal eaten sideways. I'm going to go into polls. Go into polls and vote for this. Is it A, dinner on the sofa? B, intimate relations? C, the awkwardness of speaking a foreign language? Or D, conversation with someone sitting next to you? So I'm not seeing any votes yet. That's because I'm on 10-second delay. Oh, the first vote was D. That's coming in, it's coming in, it's coming in. That's very interesting. You're going to see the answers in a little bit, but most people are not getting it right. The actual answer is the awkwardness of speaking a foreign language. The reason being, in the Latin alphabet, or most alphabets in Europe, we write lines horizontally. You can see that on my slide, horizontally, but in Japanese, you write vertically. So it's very confusing and interesting to the Japanese to read horizontally, and also can be a bit of a mouthful. So that is why speaking a foreign language is a meal eaten. This cartouche, so that's the big kind of oval with all the symbols in. And I'm going to explain to you what each of the symbols mean. And from that, I swear with my face in it might have to be shrunk, but let's see. The first one, oh no, I'm fine, is a single read, and it's pronounced E. It's a vowel. I feel like I'm doing countdown. The half circle is pronounced T, is a consonant. We've got the game board, which is M, which is a consonant sound. The next one is water, pronounced The chick is U. The ankh, or the cross with the loop, which means life, there's a syllable ankh. Actually, the ankh is quite a well-known modern symbol. You know, if you're a goth, hello to all the goths watching, maybe you've even got one tattooed. It's on your back or something. But it's quite a well-known kind of mystical modern symbol. But obviously originates from Egypt, means life. The next ones are the shepherd's crook. It means ruler. It's a word. The column is Heliopolis, and the heraldic plant of Upper Egypt. So what might this mean? I'm going to help you, and I'm going to substitute the consonants and vowels, their precise positions in the cartouche. So that's what it looks like. Well, essentially, this is something for all you Scrabble players out there, because if you had this on Scrabble, what could you get from it? Well, what you could get is obviously Tank Nmukti. No, that was wrong. Tumni Tank. No, but we're getting there. It's Tutankhamun. So basically the most famous Egyptian after Cleopatra that you knew. And Tutankhamun was obviously, if you knew your Egyptology, the ruler of Heliopolis of Upper Egypt. Let's talk more about Egyptian hieroglyphics. As I said before, it is a really, really complicated system, because the symbols, and there are hundreds of them. I think about 800 you needed to be able to be a scribe who could sort of functionally work as a scribe. The vowels, the consonants, the syllables, and the words, and they were all mixed in. It so happened that if you were a scribe and you had to write a word which is quite a rare word, or maybe the name of a foreign person, so a foreign proper name, you would only use the symbols that represented consonants. So there was a kind of a subset of the symbols, which were the symbols that represented consonants, were the ones which were used for these sort of special situations. Now, around about 2000 BC in Egypt, there were a group of migrant workers, probably speaking Babylonian, they didn't speak Egyptian, and they kind of stole this bit of hieroglyphics. So it was a kind of dumbed down, super simple, crude kind of punk version of hieroglyphics that only had symbols for consonants. Okay, and this was about 2000 BC in Egypt by non-Egyptian speakers. And what they did by doing that is that they invented the alphabet. So the alphabet, as I said before, writing was invented in at least 4 places independently, or emerged independently. But the alphabet, which is a writing system where each phonetic element, each sound has its own symbol. So in that sense, consonants or vowels, but the first one was just consonants, was invented only once. And every single alphabet in the world descends from these kind of Babylonian speaking punk migrants of Egypt 2,000 years ago. Chinese has many, they're called compound words. So they are words that consist of several characters, and each character has a separate meaning. And when you put them together, they mean something different, like a new word. So rather than inventing a new symbol and a new word, they'll just use the symbols they already have and put them together. I guess they do this because they've already got loads and loads of symbols. Anyway, is a fire chariot in Chinese a motorbike? B, a car? C, a train? Or D, a bus? And you all got this one right. Congratulations, it is the train, which is brilliant. I caught the fire chariot to Edinburgh last month. I really did. So I'm a huge Prince fan, and it's fantastic to always in any talk to put a picture of Prince. But the reason why I'm putting Prince here is that he is associated with purple, but in fact, he's not the first member of royalty, in this case pop royalty, to be associated with purple. Purple has been associated with royalty for about 3,000 years, and the reason that it has is because of this snail, or snail like it. It's a now extinct sea snail that used to live in the Mediterranean, that when you crushed it, it has this purplish mucus that you could make a brilliant purple dye. And the Phoenicians, who lived in the Levant, basically where Lebanon is now, about 1000 BC, they were great traders. They traded all across the Mediterranean. Their signature product, what they were most known for, was this purple dye, and it was incredibly expensive, and so only rich people or royalty could buy it, and that's the reason why purple is associated with royalty. And in fact, the Phoenicians really, they're the purple people. The name Phoenician, which is a Greek name, what the Greeks called them, Phoenician is the name of that color of the purple of the dye of this extinct sea snail. So why am I talking about the Phoenicians? Because the Phoenicians had something else which has an even greater legacy than purple. It is the alphabet that we use today. In fact, the Phoenician alphabet, which I'm going to put here, all European and Asian alphabets descend from the Phoenician. And it's a consonant-only alphabet, and this is what the letters are. And I think it's just fascinating just to stare at this and look at the images, look at the signs for a little bit. Firstly, to notice things that the order of letters hasn't really changed since this is kind of one of the earliest alphabets that sort of fully formed that we know about from about 1,000 years BC. But also we can see in the A, even in the A, the Phoenician A is essentially RA, but rotated 90 degrees. And that A also is the halfway house between hieroglyphics, because the sound for A actually, this is consonant only, and you're saying, what's an A doing there? It was actually the glottal stop. So it's a sound that counts as a consonant. It's not a vowel. Well, that glottal stop in Egyptian hieroglyphics was the ox's head. And you can see very clearly how the A came from the ox's head. Now, I want to give you a puzzle, of course, to understand this more. And this is the puzzle. Which Phoenician city is that, which is still a regional capital today? And I'm going to help you by just saying that those are the letters for it. So which Phoenician city is the capital today? I'm going to be nicer and just say it's up there. STRB. Let's see. Maybe you can start sending things in the chat. Something might be coming in. Well, I'm also going to be nice to you. I'm going to put the Phoenician alphabet there to see if there's anything else that you might be able to. Brilliant. Someone said Strasbourg. Strasbourg, I don't think anyone was living in Strasbourg then, but that is a brilliant, brilliant answer. Istanbul, someone has said. In fact, now I'm going to talk about, the good thing about these linguistics problems, you've got to think like a decipherer, and there are lots of assumptions that you guys are making. So look, I'm going to highlight in purple, obviously, these letters, B, G, D, K, and R. And do you notice something really interesting about it? Well, look at K. It's the wrong way round. B is kind of the wrong way round. G, if you know what a gamma is from Greek, it's the wrong way round. It's flipped. It's flipped horizontally. And D is kind of the wrong way round. So actually you can sort of see from this, or you might have been able to deduce that Phoenician is written not from left to right, but from right to left. So in other words, that is the name of the city. That is still a regional capital. And if you remember, where are they from, the Phoenicians? I gave it away. Where are they from? They're from Lebanon. And what is the capital of Lebanon? It's Beirut. In fact, it was Berytos. The Phoenicians called the main city Berytos. So you all got it now. Bratislava. It could well be Bratislava. That's absolutely brilliant. Okay, on to the next slide. We are in the zone of alphabets. So my favorite game is Name That Alphabet. This is an alphabet. It's one of the most interesting to me alphabets that I came across when I was researching this book. I didn't know anything about alphabets, and now I'm a world expert on them. This alphabet comes from either A, Bhutan, B, Easter Island, C, Mongolia, or D, Indonesia. And I think we've got a poll on this one, and let's see what happens. I'm going to say something more. This might help. If you translate this bit of text, there is no one to call the gods Lord. And the text, this word, comes from what is the longest literary text. In fact, I've written the longest written work, in fact, is the correct way to say it, in world literature. And it's the creation myth of the people that speak the language that write like this. And it was first written down about 100 years ago. And the scribe that wrote it down, it took the equivalent of 7,000 pages. It's an epic poem, the creation myth. And what is really interesting is that so far, the one that you've all got, that's got only 7% of the votes, which is the correct answer, is Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is interesting when it comes to alphabets, because I mentioned before, the alphabet was discovered, invented only one time in Egypt, and then it spread south from Egypt. You've got the Amharic alphabet, Ge'ez alphabet from in Ethiopia, and it spread north, went to the Phoenicians, then to Europe, then through Asia, and then it went through Middle East, and then Asia, and then went all the way down. And the furthest, geographically speaking, that the alphabet got before the great age of navigation, and the Europeans took their own alphabets around the world, the furthest it got was southeast Indonesia. And this is actually the script from South Sulawesi. There are three really interesting scripts of Southeast Asia. One is Balinese, which is, if anyone's been to Bali, it's like amazingly ornate. Javanese is quite similar, amazingly beautiful and ornate. And then you have Lontara script from Buginese, which is the language of South Sulawesi, which is amazingly minimal and looks like a kind of pattern rather than a writing system. And it's got so much interesting stuff about it. Firstly, it's the language and the writing system of the longest written work in literature, but also you see how all through the world that the shape of letters in alphabets is often a reflection of how they were written. And in Southeast Indonesia, alphabets were written on palm leaves. You'd get a knife or a knife stylus and write the words on the palm leaf. Then you would get a kind of inky material, rub it in, and the ink would go in the grooves and leave the ink. So that's how you would read it. And there are lots of countries, lots of cultures that write on palm leaf. And usually when you're writing lots of sentences on palm leaf, you get all the palm leaves and you put a hole in each of them and you string them together. But The Buginese of South Sulawesi did this. They put them on one single kind of tape and rolled them up in a cassette tape. So this is a cassette tape from the beginning of the 20th century. So decades before cassette tape was invented in the West, and already a culture was using it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Okay, next question. Name this alphabet. This alphabet is stunning looking, and it is either Old Hungarian, which does have its own alphabet, Georgian, which does have its own alphabet, so I'm not making these things up, Cherokee, which does have its own alphabet, and Klingon, which is a made-up language for Star Trek fans, but also does have its own alphabet. Wonder what you think it might be. And actually, Old Hungarian, which was starting not very well, is now in the lead. I'm going to stop it now. Well, not stop it. It's been stopped. Move to the next. The answer is actually Cherokee. It is quite similar to Georgian. Georgian does have lots of loops and frills. Old Hungarian actually looks like runes, and Klingon looks like splodges. It looks completely mad. But Cherokee, I want to talk about Cherokee and have a slight digression now about the amazingness of the history of Cherokee. So when I started looking into all these linguistics and language problems, I was discovering stuff that I didn't know. And yeah, I'm a maths person, but I'm also a journalist. And the story of Cherokee is one of the most incredible stories that I was to discover and learn. So the Cherokee is the largest recognized Native American tribe in America. There are about 300,000 people who call themselves Cherokee. And Sequoyah was a Cherokee who devised, in fact, the alphabet. It's actually a syllabary, but I'll get to that a bit later. Devised the writing system for Cherokee in the 1820s. And he was the first non-literate person to devise a fully functioning writing system for his own language. So just take that in. He could not read, well, he only spoke Cherokee. He saw that the white man who was coming around had what he called talking leaves. They had these bits of paper that had squiggles on that they were somehow communicating. And he went back and he thought, do you know what? I want to invent something like that for my own language, which doesn't have a writing system. So he couldn't read English. He couldn't read anything. And it took him 10 years. And the process that he went through, imagine he's trying to make notes, but he doesn't even know how to make notes because he can't write. The first thing he tried to do was to do a symbol for each word, and he realized that there would be far too many symbols. So he did a little bit of what kind of we saw Egyptian hieroglyphs do, is go smaller. And actually he recognized that there are about 80 odd syllables in Cherokee, and he designed 80 odd symbols for each syllable. But what symbols did he choose? He actually had a copy of the Bible written in English, which he couldn't read, but he saw the symbols. So he copied bits of Latin, and he was a silversmith by trade, and embellished. So if we just go back and look, what he did is that he took some letters and even numbers from this Bible and made this writing system. So it was in the early 20s, by the mid 1820s, it was finished. Go back here, it was finished. And he announced it to the kind of council, that the leaders of the Cherokee, and they embraced it, and it was called their national script. It's a syllabary rather than alphabet because it's all syllables. They got a printing press in, they started to print materials in it, and within a few years, there was the Cherokee were becoming literate faster than the white people surrounding them. And one reason is that this was a writing system designed for Cherokee. So it was really easy to learn if you knew Cherokee. Whereas having to learn how to read and write English is really difficult, even if it's the first thing you learn, because English pronunciation is just completely crazy. It's completely crazy, and it's difficult, and you make mistakes. This made Sequoyah a huge, almost like an international celebrity. He was known all over the world. And the reason why you might think, Sequoyah, I know that. Well, it is said that the tallest trees in the world are actually named after a man who was trying to capture the talking leaves of the white man. Now there's some debate about maybe the sequoia trees were named for something else, but the story is really nice. But that's not all when it comes to sequoia. It inspired people and peoples all over the world that didn't have their own writing systems, or that were rebelling against the kind of the English or French or Arabic of the alphabets of colonizers, to actually come up with their own writing systems. And it said that one recent academic paper said that more than 100 alphabets and syllabaries around the world were inspired by sequoia. There are only a few thousand people that still speak Cherokee, but if you go to the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, you will find that the signs are in the Cherokee syllabary and English. And because of the internet, there's a kind of growth in Cherokee symbols, and there are Unicode symbols for Cherokee. So it is having a bit of resurgence now. This is a man who was inspired by sequoia. He's James Evans for Hull, an English missionary who ended up on the banks of Lake Winnipeg in the 1840s. He saw how amazingly well the Cherokee were becoming literate. So together with the Cree, which was the first Nation Americans living around in that area, he devised another syllabary, which now it's called Canadian Aboriginal Syllabics. And he was a bit of an amateur linguist himself, and he was also really influenced by what was happening in the UK at the time, where Isaac Pitman had just invented shorthand, which was a sort of phonetic, fast way of writing. And he basically adapted ideas from Cherokee and Pitman's shorthand to come up with this amazing type of writing called, now it's called Canadian Aboriginal Syllabics, where there are symbols. It's also a little bit influenced by Devanagari, which is what you use to write Hindi, and dozens of Indian languages, is that the consonant always comes with a vowel, but the vowel changes based on the rotation of the consonant. So we have a, I, U, and I, and you just change it by, that's the vowel, by rotating the triangle. Again, very kind of geometric. And you do that, you've got pa, pi, pu, pi, it's the same symbol, just rotated. And so this was invented in the 1840s by this British missionary, Lake Winnipeg. Again, the Cree loved it. Within a few years, said that the Cree was some of the most literate people in the world. It was also adapted by pretty much all the first Americans, who now see Canadian Aboriginal syllabics as part of their heritage. And just here, to get there, it is the official script of Nunavut, which is the northernmost territory in Canada. So I know I had some from Toronto. They're still watching. And they could say that Nunavut, which is about 30,000 people live in Nunavut, they're Inuit, and the language is Inuktitut. And the official, well, there are two official writings. One is Latin script, and one is this Canadian Aboriginal Syllabics. So it's kind of rather wonderful to think that what was an idea of a Native American in Oklahoma has ended up is still, you know, really alive in basically near the North Pole. Right. Now we're going to stay in the Americas, and we're going to go to Arizona. So like everyone else, I've been watching the American elections. Oh, I was last week, 24/7. And especially the votes in Arizona. And then you saw one of the counties is Navajo County, where the largest ethnic group that live in Navajo County are the Navajo. And Navajo as a language is the most spoken indigenous American language spoken in North America. There are about 170,000 Navajo speakers. And I want to do a section now about Navajo, because Navajo is one of the most difficult and complicated and unusual languages in the world. I say that with a tongue in my cheek because, as I said before, every language is as weird as every other, but Navajo does certain things that really are quite different and quite unusual to most of the other languages that the people watching, like English, French, the European languages, and even Asian languages. And I want to talk about it now. Navajo is so weird and hard to learn that it was used as a military code in the Second World War. So the picture here is of what they're called code talkers. The American military trained about 400 Navajo and placed them all over the Pacific in the American bases. And whenever the Americans wanted to use code to send a message from one base to the other, the Navajo would speak in Navajo to the other Navajo in the other base. And what they did is that they had some Navajo words were used for military terms. So the word for hummingbird, for example, meant fighter plane. So the Navajo would say, oh, you know, the hummingbird, blah, blah, blah. And the other Navajo would then retranslate that. And this was such a successful military code that it was one of the only military codes in history that was never broken. And if you read up the military history, military historians will say that Americans won the war in the Pacific earlier and faster and more efficiently thanks to the Navajo code talkers. Well, it was top secret at the time, but in the decades since, when it was made public that this is what they did, the Navajo code talkers are huge public heroes in American culture. There's Hollywood movies about them. I'd never heard about them myself, but the story is absolutely amazing. So what I want to do now is explain a little bit about what is so interesting and why Navajo is different. And we're going to do that, obviously, through puzzles. So let's go. And this is going to be the most linguisticsy part of my talk, just in case you thought there wasn't enough linguistics in it. Here is a sentence. The man kicked the boy. If we were going to pass this sentence, we would say it's got a subject, it's got a verb, and it's got an object. The subject is the thing that is doing the action, the man. The verb is the action, kicked. The object is what the action is being done to the boy. The man kicked the boy. Subject, verb, object. This means English, which we like to have our subjects before our verbs, before our objects, is called an SVO language. In fact, most languages in the world are not SVO. We're only this, and we're not. It's not the most common word order. Here, again, my head's going to have to be shrunk. This is the percentage of all language. This is research done from the World Atlas of Language Structure. So it actually only counts the languages that are in the World Atlas of Language Structures. But the top two are subject, object, verb, object. There are 6 possible permutations, and there is at least one language for each of these permutations, which is, again, completely fascinating. So what's this got to do with Navajo? Well, Navajo doesn't really have one, because Navajo does things differently, as you're about to find out. We're going to translate the man kicked the boy into Navajo. Okay? You don't speak Navajo, so I'm going to tell you the vocab. Diné is man, and ashki is boy. This is one way you can write the man kicked the boy in Navajo. Diné, ashki, yistal. Okay? That's subject, object, verb. It's boy, man, boy. Man is the subject, the man kicking the boy. Sorry, man, boy, kicked. Subject, object, verb. You can also say the sentence, the exact same sentence, like this. You just flip the order of the boy and the man, or the object and the subject. Okay, so that is object, subject, verb, OSV. What's different between the two Navajo sentences? It's a prefix on the verb. So if you put the y prefix, you get subject, object, verb, SOV. If you put the B prefix, you get OSV. Interesting. Let's look at another sentence, and just to make sure that you've understood it. The bear bit the cat. Shash is bear, mósí is cat. So shash, mósí, yishash. My Navajo pronunciation is not great. It's massively complicated. So obviously the pronunciation is very difficult in Navajo. Is again subject, object, verb. But we can also say it object, subject, verb. And again, when we have the y prefix, prefix, we get SOV. And when we get the B prefix on the verb, we get OSV. Interesting. That is the basic stuff. That's the easy part. The bit of the puzzle that we're coming to now is that it turns out that one of these, the bear bit the cat, is ungrammatical in Navajo. And it is this one here. You cannot use OSV for the bear bit the cat. When you have the man kicked the boy, you can use OSV and SOV. That's fine. But when it's the bear bit the cat, you cannot have OSV. It's not allowed. It's ungrammatical. Let's see another one. The spider bit the man. Tsisná is spider, diné is man. So you can do SOV with the y. You can do OSV with the B. But here, the SOV is not allowed. That's ungrammatical. You can only do it OSV. So the question is, why sometimes can you use SOV and why sometimes can you use OSV? Now, if you have my book, you'll be able to write it all down, but I'm going to help you and do what you need to see here, which is just draw a list of when you can use it and when you can't, and we're going to compare it. So in these simple sentences, we have the subject and the object, and they're both nouns, and the order, noun 1 is the first one in the sentence, noun 2 is the second one in the sentence. When we had man kicked the boy, we can have them in this order, and we can have them in this order. When we had bear bit the cat, we can have them in this order, but we can't have them in that order. When we had the spider bit the man, we can't have them in that order, but we can have them in this order. And I've done a few others. Man and baby, that order. Baby man, we're not allowed in that order. We're allowed baby before cat. We're not allowed cat before baby. We're allowed mouse before bee, but we're not allowed bee before mouse. We're allowed baby before bull, and we're allowed bull before baby. Now, why do you think that the list of on the left are permitted grammatically and on the right are not? So we've got interesting things. Human versus animal is almost getting there, but not quite. Someone has said the right one. It's size, but it's actually size described linguistically as animacy. The Navajo has a hierarchy of animacy. Animacy means how alive something is. And in their kind of metaphysics, how they view the world, human, adults and children and lightning have the highest animacy. They're level 1. Then babies and big animals, then medium-sized animals, then small animals, then insects and creepy crawlies, then plants and objects, then other natural forces that aren't lightning, and then abstractions. And whenever you have nouns in a sentence, you have to for it to be grammatical, you have to obey the hierarchy of animacy. So you can say baby cat, but you can't say cat baby. To me, that is something I never knew and absolutely fascinating. And it's been most researched in Navajo, but is also true in some of the, to have something like this in some of the other languages in the same family group in America. Great. On to the next one. This is another quick one. So go to the polls. This is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Begins, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Yes, they are. And it's been translated into one of these 4 languages. It's either Latvian, Maltese, Albanian, or Turkish. And as a clue, it has a letter that only exists in this language and none other, which is the crossed H. Let's see where you're going. Yeah, most people seem to have got this, and I think you would have got this because when you read it out, it doesn't actually sound, like it's a Indo-European language, doesn't it? It's actually Maltese, which most people had, 45%, well done. And Maltese is essentially Arabic, but written in a Latin script. And it's interesting, it means that it's the only Arabic language that is an official language of the EU. We're almost coming to the end, but I said we're going to be doing sign language. This is a country, and this is being said in a sign language by some Cistercian monks. So the Cistercian order is a religious order that was founded about 1,000 years ago in the 10th century. And it's an offshoot of the Benedictines, but they wanted to be even more kind of stricter, kind of God-fearing, and they banned speaking. So they weren't allowed to speak to each other. So verbal communication in a lot of their day-to-day lives was prohibited. So they devised 1,000 years ago, the first symbols are actually from the 11th century, their first signs. And it was used for 1,000 years, this monastic sign language of the Cistercians. So when the Cistercians were, in the late Middle Ages, the most powerful and influential religious group in Europe, they were using this. And the Cistercians, they're also known as kind of Trappists. There are monasteries all over the world. And in 1975, Robert Barakat, a researcher, went to the Cistercian monastery near Worcester in Massachusetts in America, and they were still using it. And he took all these pictures, and that book, Cistercian Sign Language, explains, a lot what the signs mean. There is a Cistercian abbey in England, and I emailed them when I was researching my book, and I said, do you still use this? I couldn't really call them up if they are not allowed to speak. And the email came back saying that they don't anymore, but some of their elder monks still understand it. So they were around when it was still used. So it's sad it's kind of dying out, or maybe it really has died out. But it's wonderful because obviously the words are very much what monks would, a lot of religious language. And obviously it was changing. That makes it great puzzles because there are small signs and you put the signs together, a bit like the Chinese compound words. You look at the small ones and you try and deduce what the big one is. And here, each sign, it could be miming, it could be showing a symbol, it could be pointing to something. And so you should be able to deduce what this is. I wonder if people have started to, in the chat, say me what it is. I've got Vatican City, brilliant, Belgium, China. What I'm going to, first hint is that sign means the courtyard, but it's used for country. So all countries, to make it clear that you're doing a country, has that on it. What are we doing? That is drink, isn't it? He's drinking. And what's that? That's tea. What is the drink tea country? This is in America, remember? Where do the people think all we do is drink tea? England. So that is how you say England. I got a next one. What country is this? It's obviously a country because the last one says country. What do we say? What's this one? Some people are saying UK. It's not the UK. I guess it could be a K because you've got K. That thing with the fingers looks like a K. Okay, I'm going to say what they are. The first one's an E. The next one is tall. The next one's E. So it is Italy. Brilliant. We're now going to my final puzzle, which is a very quick one. And I said that it would be a puzzle about pizza. Italy, there we go. Said to be a puzzle about pizza. And also returns me to one of the other languages I speak fluently, which is Brazilian Portuguese. And this phrase, I can remember learning it when I was in Brazil, and it's brilliant and it's used all the time. What is the correct meaning of acabar em pizza? To end in pizza. It's a nice way to end this talk because I might go and have a pizza after this. I wish you could all join me. To end in pizza, is it A, to get flattened? Let's go to the poll. Let's see how you do. A, to get flattened. B, to end in a mess. To end with no punishment. Or D, to disappear. I'm just going to wait a little bit as you think and as the votes start coming in. Okay, the correct answer, which is to end with no punishment. And the reason that it is that Brazil, even Brazilians would say that there's a lot of corruption in Brazil. And quite often there are lots of investigations. People go after people to try and get the corrupt people. And then what happens? Nothing. Essentially, the investigators and the criminals, Brazil's a very cordial country. It just ends with everyone, good guys and bad guys, just going out for pizza. The idea is if something ends in pizza, it ends with everyone sitting around the table just having pizza. Thing is kind of brushed under the carpet, to use a British phrase. All those puzzles, in fact, and a lot more backgrounds besides. I mean, there's almost 500 pages, the puzzle book, plus full explanations, is in the Language Lovers Puzzle Book. And David Crystal, eminent guru on all things to do with the languages, said it's the perfect companion for anyone who loves puzzles and languages. And who am I to disagree?